ऐसी मशीन लगाऊंगा, इस साइड से आलू घुसेगा, उस साइड से सोना निकलेगा।
They are asking a foul question and the CPM question.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Attention Please podcast. This is your host, Arnab, and today the topic is going to be diamonds in the clubhouse. But before we begin, word on subscribing. First of all, subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcast app. So the plug for this podcast. And more importantly, again, I usually make this appeal at the end of the podcast, but today I'm going to change things up and talk about it in the beginning, is if you like this podcast, if you believe that it brings some value to your life, enables you to pass 30 to 40 minutes of your life in a fruitful way, then I would encourage you to consider becoming a monthly subscriber to the podcast in terms of a financial subscriber by signing up as a patron on my Patreon page. Contributions start from $1 a month. This is just a way of showing support to the podcast and of basically ensuring that it persists, because right now it is, I enjoy doing it, but just to see people supporting it, and really there's no better support than a financial contribution that just motivates me to make the podcast better and to just keep on continuing. So again, if this podcast means something, then please do consider being a patron for this podcast. Again, there's no paywall, so the podcast will always remain free for everybody. So what does diamonds in the clubhouse mean? So initially, I thought that today I'll be talking about Naxalism and the general nature of the Naxalist ideology. But something happened between when I thought I would do it and the recording of this show today. So what happened? Well, for those of you who are not in the know, let's provide a brief primer, if you may, on or rather background as to what happened. So there's this new social media app, I would say, called Clubhouse. It is, I wouldn't say it's taking the world by storm, but because they're in limited dhak dhak karne laga beta, and I had to say that. And it's invitation only, iPhone only social media where conversations happen only over audio. So since it's invitation only and iPhone only, it's exactly the kind of place where you would find journalists and social media influencers who are concerned about the fate of the poor and the marginalized. It's one way of looking at Clubhouse. It's like the business class lounge of British Airways. I mean, yes, it's business class, but you're also flying British Airways. So there's that. It's kind of the cool skid clubs, and I have a Clubhouse account, and I really haven't been able to figure out what to do with it. There's really nothing to do except to listen to other people speak, and just the way the social media, the structure of it is, you're kind of exposed to very limited conversations. So you find like there are 3 or 4 conversations going on, one for startups, one for dating during COVID. I have no idea why I get that. And you have the option to listen to some strangers talking about their dating experiences during COVID. I don't understand what purpose that serves. I'm not getting that, but I do have an account because, of course, whenever anything new comes out, I have to have an account. But yesterday, this Clubhouse came up in another context, and it kind of became headline news, and it was pretty much amusing. What happened was that some of these journalists and social media influencers, as I said, who are extremely concerned about the majoritarian fascism that's going on in this country, decided to do a question answer session with Mr. PK. And Minister PK, as you well know, Prasant Kishore, has been hired by Mamata Banerjee. He's been hired by various political parties, including the Congress, to strategize. I've heard that, and many people say that he charges quite a pretty penny for strategizing. As we know, this is the consultancy business, and he's kind of has a monopoly on political consulting and strategizing in India. And I've never really, based on my, of course, not interactions, because why would he interact with me? But based on listening to him, I've never kind of come across. He's never kind of come across as kind of one of the brightest bulb in the lot. And if there was any further proof that he's not, it's the whole thing that happened in Clubhouse. So again, coming back to what actually happened. So he was doing one of these audio sessions with a select group of cool kids, where the cool kids were, those the resistance of Indian media. Not really the first rung, I would say, not the Sardesais, not there, but in just one step below. The kind of like the Nitish Ranas of the Indian media resistance. Of course, with one notable exception, of course, Mr. Ravish Kumar. But so they were having a discussion where they were asking Prasant Kishore, "Hey man, what's going on with this? I mean, is the saffron flag going to be planted in Bengal?" And Prasant Kishore was kind of having a conversation that people normally have when they know that they're kind of not being recorded. It's the kind of a and I don't think that he at least initially thought that he was being recorded. I think over the course of the conversation, maybe he realized that maybe I might be getting recorded here. Maybe this is not everybody here is a friend of mine. So I don't know what happened, because his tone definitely changed during the course of this conversation, whatever I heard of it. And so this was kind of him having a off-the-cuff conversation, which is why it's interesting, because this was not the stuff that he gets paid to say on television. So this was much more, I would say, him as he really is. So what he says, to summarize what he said in the call, and there was, of course, moments of great unintentional hilarity, including a question on, how does Mamata Banerjee go to the restroom? And there were questions like that, how does she have time to go to the restroom, which would possibly be the 2021 version of, what kind of mango do you like in terms of sheer bhaktbazi. So there were questions like that, to which PK's answer was, seriously expecting me to answer that? Of course, I don't know. But, so coming to what PK said, so what Prasant Kishore essentially said was, despite his public bluster, which he came back to, obviously has to. I mean, if you're the guy who's kind of done the PowerPoint slides, if you are the political McKinsey, you have to stand by what you said. And if you cannot guarantee success, then you don't have a business model any longer. So I understand his public persona and I understand his public statements. But in terms of what he said on Clubhouse to the cool kids, was that Mamata Banerjee's has been appeasing minorities, newsflash, Mr. Obvious. And for the first time, the Hindus have a party which is directly speaking to them, which has never happened in Bengal elections. Neither the CPM nor the Trinamool Congress has ever addressed Hindus as Hindus. And this is a rather novel experience for Bengal, and which is why, at least in the beginning of the conversation, he seemed to be skeptical. Of course, he later on said, but anyways, even though it seems that they're going head to head, the BJP is not going to win more than 100 seats, and he repeated that on social media, which again is not really consistent with what he was saying when he thought that he was having an off-the-cuff, off-the-record conversation. So what he was saying was that, essentially, is what I have been saying, is that it's even Stevens at this point of time. And the fact that the BJP has made huge inroads, that's what he started off by saying. And another thing that he said was that the OBCs are in general voting for the BJP, which of course threw Mr. Ravish into a tizzy, because as we know, Mr. Ravish sees the entire world through the prism of caste. He's the only guy who starts off with "Kaun sa jaat ka ho." I mean, that's his main concern is what your caste is. He cannot see beyond that, I believe. So, So OBC is voting for BJP, which, according to the social scientist part of Ravish, just cannot happen. And how is that happening? And what was interesting was that it is Prasant Kishore's assessment that Modi is now as popular as Mamata Banerjee. Now, the first thing that I thought was that, did they not think any of these people feel that they were on a public forum where they were being recorded, and that, just because Clubhouse is not as populated as Twitter, because, as I said, it's in public beta, and it's not open to all, they felt that there was nobody there that could be recording or could be listening, that they actually thought that they would ask these kinds of questions, and that PK himself would be so, this is the kind of conversations, by the way, that I've heard in lit fests when, after a few drinks, they sit around and talk. This is exactly what Lutyens conversations are. This is exactly what it is. This is the reality of the world that you live in. And everything that you read in the papers is the projected reality. That's the Maya. And this is the actual reality. Again, I don't think that they were still in the realm of what actual reality was, but it was much more real than what they would say on social media, which is now essentially, social media, I mean Twitter or Facebook, which is essentially, their public persona. So one thing was, how smart do these guys have to be to believe that they were not being monitored? The second is, I think it was hilarious, and it's somebody definitely needs to talk about Ravish now, because Ravish is somebody who's eulogized by sections of the Indian intelligentsia as what a media figure should be. Now, he might be, I don't know, but the only thing what I want to understand is, does Ravish the Great not really understand what anti-incumbency means? Because at one point of time he says, how is Mamata Banerjee not benefiting from anti-incumbency? At which point of time PK had to say, but she's the person in power. How can she benefit from anti-incumbency? Because in the recesses, in the dark recesses of Ravish's mind, where everything is controlled by the Nazi Hitlers and Goebbels and Goerings of the BJP, they rule supreme all over India. As I've said multiple times in the podcast, anti-incumbency, anti-government is essentially being anti-BJP, even when the BJP rules. This was fun, because when the UPA ruled at the center, the whole notion of speaking truth to power was Gujarat at that point of time. But once they became the federal government, it's essentially the federal government is everywhere. So even a state government in a state election, apparently, as per the understanding of Max Sase award winner Ravish, is supposed to benefit from anti-incumbency, even though they have been the ruling power for the last 10 years. And again, I think, I don't want to get too much into Ravish, but he surrounds himself with this forced seriousness. But underneath, is this the level at which he analyzes? Is this really, it's a fascinating look into the algorithm of his mind. And again, it just goes to show that, when you're somebody who's so blinkered by, your projection of what caste is, of what, yet you often miss the thing that's staring at you right in the face. It was hilarious. And it kind of shows that while we do make a lot of fun of Ashutosh, I think it's time to consider whether Ravi should be bracketed within that category also, after hearing him in that Clubhouse interaction. But rather than concentrating on the individuals and the personalities, which I'm more than happy to do, but moving on, what I found particularly interesting was what Prasant Kishore said, the kind of language that the OBCs voting for BJP, that doesn't quite tally with my personal understanding of Bengal politics. See, I normally, for those of you who follow this podcast, I normally don't do state elections at this level of detail. I've been doing a series of episodes on the Bengal elections because I feel that, having grown up in the state, this is a state which I understand. And in order to talk and in order to understand elections in India, I actually feel that, the pundits in Delhi, they don't know anything, because they might know their own state. Like all of us know our own states, but that's really where the limits of our knowledge is. The difference between me and them is I know where the limit of my knowledge is, and they don't. So it's very difficult in India because of its how heterogeneous it is. It's very difficult to analyze the mind of the voter when you're not one of the voters, when you don't belong to that state. For instance, it's very difficult for me to parse the voter in Uttar Pradesh or parse the voter in Tamil Nadu. I can't. I mean, I could read about it, but I still won't really understand what actually goes through their minds because it's not what goes through my mind. But in Bengal, that's not true. Being a Bengali, I do understand. And I've seen enough of Bengal elections. I have listened to people who are knowledgeable about Bengal elections, talking about Bengal elections in Clubhouse kind of environments where they know they're not being recorded. So I have some idea as to how the Bengali mind works. And one of the big things, and one of these things that these Delhi journalists or the Ravishas of the world don't understand is caste affiliation in Bengal isn't such a big thing in terms of politics. It just doesn't work that way. OBCs don't think of themselves as a bloc voting like that. That might work in some other states, but in Bengal, it just doesn't work like that. Because in Bengal, even the caste structure is different. There are Sadgops. I'm a Sadgop. So these are, the analog Yadavs in Bihar. There are Vaidyas. They are like Ghoshals and Ghoshal is not a Vaidya, sorry. Ghoshal is a Sadgop. Again, these things escape me. I keep forgetting. Vaidyas are saints. So Amartya Sen is a Vaidya. So there's really no identity, there's no political identity for any of these Bengali castes at all. So to kind of look at the data through a caste prism is itself, yes, sure, the data can exist, but this is, data analytics 101. The semantics of the data, it's not just what the data is, it's not just the syntax of the data or what data elements you're collecting, but the semantics of what the data means. That's where I think PK is off. Now, there's some exception. There is the Matuas. They've always maintained a distinct identity, and politicians have quoted their vote as a mass. And many people who are very knowledgeable about the Matua caste, they've also said that considering them as a vote bank is also a gross simplification. And so if you're trying to understand the growth of BJP by looking at caste arithmetic, then you're basically taking a semantic model that perhaps works in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and you're trying to retrofit it onto Bengal, which is a totally different beast. Bengal as an election state, it's unique. I guess every state is unique. And Bengal has its, like, one of the unique things about Bengal we've talked about many times is the intellectuals. And I want to end it with that. So this whole notion of an intellectual vanguard is like non-existent in any other state. I mean, why does Mamata Banerjee have to paint, and why does she have to take obscene amounts of money as payment for those paintings, which are nothing like, which are any 8-10-year-old would possibly do better than that, or that her poems, which are, I don't know what English word to use for them, but which are like the best sellers in Bengal. I mean, why does money have to come in like that? Why can't they just give the money? Why does it have to be in exchange for art? This is something, in order to understand Bengali elections, you have to understand this is the way the Bengali mind works. So the reason why, whether it be Prasant Kishore or whether it be Chidambaram, he made a tweet today about Bengal secular ethos, that how come these Bengalis are going for BJP, is that they don't understand that they've come from a fundamental wrong assumption that the ground state of Bengal is a state of supreme secularism. I spent the entire podcast yesterday, last time, where I deconstructed the culture and intellectual underpinnings of Hindutva as it grew in Bengal. So it's absolutely not true that Hindus and Muslims have always lived a life of great bhaichara in this state. That's not true. And again, you don't need to believe me or you need to buy into what I said in my last podcast, but you just need to look at the history of communal violence. This is obviously not something, bloodbath at this scale, you just cannot explain it away, as Bengali historians have done, was based on the evil politics of the Muslim League and was based on the evil imperialist designs and, some of the intransigence of the Congress. So it's not, you cannot explain this level of communal bloodbath and genocide based on certain political decisions or based on certain evil intentions of imperialists. It just doesn't, it's an oversimplification, and it has been done in order to take people's attention away from what actually was. That's why, as I said last time, you find very few people talking about the Anushilan Shamiti and the other Shamitis from which the Bengal revolutionaries came, and how they would, in today's world, be considered to be Hindu militant organizations. So a bloodbath, as I was saying, just doesn't happen in that idealized, secularized state that they want to think that Bengal is and has always been. Now, a form of civil secularism has existed, as it has in many places in India, where people have cohabited in peace. But that doesn't mean that they didn't consider the distinction that with others. So this is a very important thing. And this is, again, something which our secular Marxist historians have tried to downplay, because this comes from Marxist doctrine that there really is no distinction between religion. Ultimately, what matters is whether you are a farmer or a laborer. That's really the only worth distinction. But the problem with Marxist theory is that it essentially takes a theory, and this is what happens with many PhDs, is that then it tries to fit it onto the real world. And if it doesn't fit, they just ignore the fact that it doesn't fit. That's it. You just write a paper and you just ignore the places where it doesn't fit. So that's really this model of Bengali secularism that they presume, and that's why they're shocked when they see the BJP has made inroads. How could they? How could they? But this has always been, Bengal has always been one of the intellectual cradles of the Hindutva movement. So, of course, the BJP, it's just that the brand of Hindutva that the BJP as a party has played has not been in consonance with the Bengali concept of Hindutva. So the aggressive vegetarianism, the cow worship, and all of this is somewhat foreign to the Bengali conception of the Hindu identity, which is why they've also people have found it funny to an extent. They found it, well, that's like really non-Bengalism. So again, for a Bengali, it's both. For a Bengali Hindu, it's their identity is a confluence of being a Hindu as well as of being a Bengali. They're proud of both. It's not that they're not proud of the Hindu part of it. They are. So what exactly went wrong? Now, what exactly went wrong isn't as simple also as what Prasant Kishore said. Oh, Mamata Banerjee went and did minority appeasement. There's a very valid counter argument that Trinamool Congress supporters would give to that, and they would say that she didn't actually. That why is Mamata Banerjee accused? And this is a very valid point. First of all, this whole thing of Mamata Banerjee does not allow Durga Puja, this is absolutely fake news. I mean, this is again something which BJP says ad nauseum based on one isolated incident, which was not even as simple as it was made out to be. But if anything, over the last 10 years, and this is one of the cornerstones of what Mamata Banerjeeism is, because it derives from what CPM used to do in Bengal. This is an old CPM political strategy, is that they love clubs, not the clubhouse types, but organizations of mostly jobless men who can be targeted, locality wise. And this club is formed around a Durga Puja or a Saraswati Puja. So it's not that it's not the love for the god or their devotion. It's from a political point of view. They want these clubs. And because these clubs are units of political mobilization as well as of violence, so they want these clubs. So under Mamata Banerjee, the whole notion of Durga Puja clubs have gone up, if anything. So to say that Mamata Banerjee is anti-Hindu in the way that the BJP likes to message is absolutely fallacious. That is not true. Mamata Banerjee's main thing is she will appeal to anybody who can bring her votes and then bring her money. It doesn't matter what they believe in. The foundational principle of Trinamool Congress is that they have an absolute zero belief in anything. It is almost an extreme form of political nihilism. There is no intellectual foundation of what Trinamool Congress is. This is not like DMK, which there is a very hardcore political ideology behind the growth of the DMK and AIDMK. The Trinamool Congress has absolutely nothing. It is just a blank page. So Trinamool Congress, to call it a party of, as even PK kind of said, is him basically misunderstanding or misinterpreting his own client. Now, this is true, you guys can find this out. If Mamata Banerjee has given stipends to imams, he has also gone and given stipends to Brahmins. So for her, it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you can bring in votes, as long as you can provide muscle on election day, you are perfectly fine. I have no problem with you. So why has this happened? Why is she being considered? So when PK says that, the appeasement of minorities, what he should clarify is the perception that she is being partial to minorities. That's not actually any different from what the CPM was. The only difference between what the CPM did, and which is why polarization did not occur, and what Mamata Banerjee did, and this is very important, is the optics that Mamata Banerjee chooses to engage in. This is the main difference. So if you look at purely quote-unquote appeasement in terms of special benefits provided to minorities, which again, Mamata Banerjee is more than happy to dole out to majorities also, as long as she is assured of their quote-unquote loyalty. The difference between the way the CPM did it and the difference is the reason why the BJP has been able to get a foothold. Because the CPM nominally had Marxism, had the red book to go by, they could not do certain displays that Mamata Banerjee felt that she was okay with doing, because she felt that it cemented the emotional connect between her and her vote bank. For instance, you would never find a picture of Jyoti Basu wearing a skull cap and doing namaz. You will never find one of Jyoti Basu, Buddhadev, Jatin Chakraborty, none of the old communists. You would ever find them ever being photographed. They were, of course, in those days, there was no YouTube. But trust me, they never did it. So, did they go to a temple? No, they didn't publicly do that either. Now, there were some Anandabaja wrote, also this communist leader was, standing in front of Ma Durga and praying, and they would make some snide remark about, religion being the opium. But that was okay. In a way, Durga Thakur is not even looked upon. It's like, in the Bengali mind, it's not Hinduism as so much, it's Bengalism. So it's perfectly fine for you to be a hardcore communist and say that religion is a human construct and there is no God and this is, and then stand in front of Ma Durga and do Anjali. That there was never seemed to be, and again, might seem to be an inconsistency, but in the Bengali mind, there is no inconsistency between the two. The only thing that really, and again, this comes to understanding the core of the Bengali mind. The Bengali mind is excessively focused on emotion. I mean, voting is an emotional exercise, but it's perhaps in Bengal, it's even more than anywhere, which is why that explains the amount of political violence in Bengal. Because in Bengal, it's not just a question of you voting, it's personal. And people find it difficult to understand. They think of Bengalis as kind of, peace-loving, they like to eat, fish, like to read books. That's not true. I mean, it's partially the picture, but it's also the truth that Bengalis take politics very personally. So they're willing to fight. They're willing to die for this, for trivialities. And this is very much a part of the Bengali psyche. If you've read some of the literature that came out of Pakistan after the secession of Bangladesh, this is one of the things which they struggled to understand, this passion of the Bengali, the fact that rather than peacefully coexisting among themselves as Muslims, the Bengalis in Bangladesh were just so quick to take offense at anything about anything. It didn't matter what it was, but everything was political, everything was offensive, and everything led to protests and violence. So again, they struggle to understand that mindset. But we as Bengalis, we totally understand that. We get that passion. We get that passion with respect to everything. And politics is something which Bengalis are extremely passionate about, which brings me to what, the emotional effect of in a already polarized state, which, as I said, which always has been. Again, if this was truly secular, then Mamata Banerjee, doing namaz, that imagery wouldn't even have affected anybody. But for that has been really, it's not so much what she has done, but the optics, that has been the problem with her. Again, I would have expected PK to make that point, but maybe he doesn't know. And Mamata Banerjee has struggled. For instance, let's take the example of her looking at the Muslim vote bank. Now, Mamata Banerjee now has to bank on the Muslim vote bank. She thinks that, look, man, I have done stuff that nobody else has done. They've done namaz, done these things, which the CPM hasn't even done for you. Now, why would Muslims care for that? They don't, right? Nobody does. She thinks they should, but they don't. And now she becomes disappointed and angry, and her henchmen become angry when they find that, they don't really care. Not all of them care about that. I mean, why would you? If there are no jobs, if there is corruption going on in front of you. But Mamata Banerjee likes to think, but I have done more for you than anybody else has. Who has done this? Who would do this for you? So that optics that she engaged in, she knew very well the implications of that optics. So she felt that by doing that, she crossed a line for them. And now she feels that is not being reciprocated. So now she's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because who's making inroads into the Muslim vote bank? Well, there is the Indian Secular Front, which has been started by this guy called Abbas Siddiqui, who's a radical Islamic preacher. And when I say radical, I mean a radical Islamic preacher. I mean, he asked for public flogging of Nusrat Jahan, Trinamool Congress MP, because she celebrates Durga Puja wearing a sindoor. And so this person is really the person who the Trinamool Congress fears, because even though he's not going to win a lot of seats, might not win even a seat, he's definitely going to cut into the vote bank that Mamata Banerjee thinks she is owed, the entitlement to that vote bank. Now, one thing that PK could have told her, and again, I wish PK had talked about these things, was just go ahead and bring Abbas Siddiqui over to your cause, because somebody like Abbas Siddiqui, they have no scruples. They can go with whoever. I mean, look at who the Indian Secular Front is allied with. They're now allied with the Communist Party of India, the guys who used to say religion is opium of the masses, and of course, the idea of India Secular Congress. These are the guys who are now playing footsie with a radical Islamic preacher who, again, I will say, asked for a public flogging of Nusrat Jahan, a Trinamool Congress MP. Okay, that level of intolerance. Again, you wouldn't find a lot of criticism of Abbas Siddiqui. I mean, imagine if somebody like a Hindu preacher had said this in Uttar Pradesh, what would have happened? Again, flies under the radar, because again, this is not a comfortable narrative, so they don't say it. But here again, what prevents Mamata Banerjee from going and aligning with Abbas Siddiqui? She could have, but here she realizes that if she goes to Abbas Siddiqui, if she goes that route, then she might get some Muslim votes, but she will lose way more Hindu votes at that point of time. I mean, she understands the notion, because if one thing, Mamata Banerjee understands the Bengali mind, or at least used to, I would say. And she knows that there are some optics that she can do, but there are some things which, given that the BJP is literally there at the door, she can't. Maybe in a different world, she would have just gone over to Abbas Siddiqui, seen what he wants, and just got him over to her side. Because it's not that, she's, again, as I said, the Trinamool Congress stands for nothing ideologically. As long as she realizes that there is something who can bring her votes and bring her whatever it is, whatever value, she's perfectly fine with reaching out to them, because everything is fungible in her mind. So again, I'll come back to where PK goes horribly wrong. And this is where I had to wonder, why is this guy paid, I don't know what I hear, hundreds of crores for this level of insight? I mean, this is something which, somebody can write in a tweet. So and again, this is what happens, is there's so much data analytics will get you. But, this whole thing about the emotion, that, the Bengali voter, they understand that politicians are dishonest. Ask any Bengali, they don't expect, and I guess it's true for Indian voters, but let me just restrict the context to the Bengali voter, is everybody knows that the politicians are corrupt. There's no doubt in their minds. But when they attach themselves to, let me take it back. They know that politics is corrupt. They know that. I'm coming to the politicians. They know that politics is a corrupt thing. That in order to run elections, in order to maintain this infrastructure, in order to maintain the party, somebody needs to pay. And I'm not paying, so somebody is paying, and somebody is paying because somebody is getting a return on their investment. Whether they articulate it like this or not, most Bengali voters understand this subconsciously. So in that respect, they're not looking to any difference between one party and another with respect to that. Now, and this is where it's very important, why Mamata Banerjee was so popular and why now Mamata Banerjee is tied with Modi as per PK in terms of popularity, it's not because of the Muslim appeasement, but that her biggest USP, the thing that I grew up seeing Mamata Banerjee as, and I was a big fan of her at one point of time, it was because that she was perceived to be personally extremely honest. She was always seemed to be a firebrand, somebody who was barely in control of her emotions, flying off the handle, volatile, but that was considered to be endearing. That was considered to be part of who Didi was. She is like that because she cares. That's why. Yeah, she's angry. She's always shouting. She's always threatening. She's always finding conspiracies in every corner. She's paranoid. But at her heart, she's not a bad person. She's a good person. She has empathy for people. Maybe she calls strikes at the drop of a hat, but it's because she cares. Look at her. She wears this one, ragged sari every place. She walks. She doesn't have a car. She gets hit on the head. She doesn't. And in contrast to each of that point of time, she was in Congress. So in contrast, the other opposition, they were all set in terms of the CPM had set the opposition up. So they were all given their little markets to basically extort and run haftas on. So they all had this. They had lived luxuriously, and they would make some token opposition as long as the CPM approved of it. But the only person that was scrupulous, and some people, nobody expected her to take the CPM down in her lifetime. The CPM was this powerful, but everybody kind of liked her. Maybe many people didn't take her seriously, but they liked her. At least that's the Mamata Banerjee I grew up with. She was a likable person. And the likability came from the fact, there was that, that attempt to put a PhD on her name, and people said, what, it's okay, everybody does that. She's a little emotional. But, again, it doesn't come from any bad intent. It comes from a good intent. She's a good person. And again, why is she a good person? Because she's honest personally, and because she tries. Whatever she believes in, which is that the CPM is terrible, she tries. She tries her best in the way that she knows, and she is, in a way, incorruptible. Because the CPM tried to buy her off also, just like they tried to buy every Congress person off. And she was the only person who everybody knew was not for sale. And that gave her the respect. And she has cashed in that respect for decades. But that's not the Didi of today. And again, she would have gotten away with it because no matter what has happened, ultimately it's her. But the main problem, and that's something which PK does not bring up, is her bhaipo. That's the guy who, if you look at the BJP leaders' speeches, they attack the bhaipo, Abhishek, at every opportunity because it's him that everybody detests because he's this brash, arrogant, guy who's done nothing for the state except he's brought to the party nothing but his DNA. And again, is he corrupt? Nobody, there's no proof against him. Again, there's some people, the accusation is obviously there, but what's definitely beyond doubt is he is really the person who has taken over. He's effectively now the chief minister in many ways. I mean, Mamata Banerjee is there, but Mamata Banerjee prefers to concentrate on national politics. And he's definitely being groomed to be her successor. And he is somebody who's universally reviled because he meets every aspect of the hated politician. Again, the emotional disconnect with him is supreme. And just the way Trinamool Congress, whenever they speak, if you listen to any of the interviews, they'll say the great noble guidance of Mamata Didi and Abhishek Da or Abhishek, or they will always refer to his name as if they are hyphenated in terms of, and that is something, if you look at the exodus of party members from Trinamool Congress, it has been because of Abhishek's brashness and his arrogance and ultimately that's what's hurting her. It's that even today, Didi has this wealth of affection that people have for her. The Muslim appeasement and all of that, minority appeasement, that's there, but it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. None of this would have happened, I believe, if Abhishek Banerjee was not given the prominence that he was given. That was where I think she lost touch. She forgot what it was that made her such an icon in Bengal politics. Now compare that with Narendra Modi. Now, no matter what you may think of the BJP as a party, of course, somebody is financing them too. So, and again, as I said, the voters are immune to that. They know that. I mean, it's the same guy, Shubhendu Adhikari, who was with Mamata Banerjee, who's now with BJP. So, what's the difference? The difference is Modi. That's the difference. Modi represents that same kind of person that Mamata Banerjee once was. It's not that he is uniformly successful. Then Bengalis who may definitely think that there's a lot of things that didn't work, demonetization. But again, just like Mamata Banerjee, they think the perception is it comes from a good faith. This person is not personally corrupt. This person doesn't have a bhaipo or a bhagne or a bhanja who's in. Now, you can say, well, what about Amit Shah? That's right. That's why Amit Shah is not the person. That's why there's no emotional connect with Amit Shah. But there is an emotional connect with Modi because Modi is able. And that's why they had Mithun Chakravarti also. Again, Mithun Chakravarti is a person who, he's now never going to be a Mamata Banerjee. That's why it said that the only person in Bengal who can go up against Mamata Banerjee is sort of Ganguly, because he is seen to be also a person who has a high level of personal probity. When he was a captain, he took over the national team at a time when it was torn apart by match fixing. He brought back honor to Indian cricket. It's not so much that he made it. He did win some victories. It's not this cricketing achievements which give him his aura, but how he saved the very soul of Indian cricket. That's why I felt that Ganguly would have been a knockout blow against Mamata Banerjee if they had been able to get him to run against Mamata Banerjee. But he didn't, whatever the reason for that may be. But that comes back to Modi versus Mamata. You see, Modi has, and again, you can say this is, if you don't like Modi, you'll say all of this is perception, all of this is advertising, all of this is PR, and it very well might be. In a way, truth doesn't matter. But what matters at election is the connect that the voter feels. When the voter goes and presses the button, they're not looking at GDP. They have some expectation of what I will gain from this election. All of them know that out of the 100 things that have been promised to them, they will possibly get 20. Both of them have promised a lot. They'll possibly get something. So there's really not much in terms of who will I get more from. Ultimately, it comes to what the Americans like to say, who would you like to have a beer with? And right now, when Prasant Kishore says that Mamata Banerjee has tied with Modi, this to me is the biggest news that comes out of this election, because otherwise, Narendra Modi is the kind of person who no true blue Bengali would even have any kind of emotional connect with. He's a Gujarati guy, can't barely, his Bengali is hilarious. He's not an intellectual. He is definitely not an intellectual. He's not an Amartya Sen or a Manmohan Singh, or his academic credentials are suspect, to put it mildly. And he has no connection with Bengal whatsoever. There was no reason why Bengalis would feel even a significant, even like 10% of Bengalis would consider him to be as popular as Mamata Banerjee, where on the other hand, you have Mamata Banerjee. There is a video which I had shared a long time ago on my Facebook social feed. And it's a beautiful, funny, sad video of, there's this lady who, and I'd like to conclude this with that example. So there's a lady who is a Vaishnavite. So she is very much an observant Hindu. She has this tilak, which is on her forehead. And there's this interviewer who's asking her in Hindi. Her Hindi is terrible. So it's the Bengali Hindi, which of course is very funny for us Bengalis when a Bengali speaks in Hindi. So he's asking her, who does she vote for? And so she says, and this I believe in, that's why it said this possibly it's only one person, but in a way this characterizes much of what the Bengali voter now is. So she says, I vote for CPM. I vote for Kaste Haturi, even though I support Modi. So this guy is like, why? What? I'm not understanding what this lady is saying. So she says, look, when I was a little girl, my dad used to take me to vote, and I have always voted for the CPM. And then she says, once, basically what she says, she's a Vaishnavite. So she says, once you love Krishna, and she says Jyoti Basu. For her, Jyoti Basu is like Krishna. He's like God. Even though Jyoti Basu wouldn't believe in God and would possibly laugh at this person. She says, he's a God for me. So I will always vote for him. I can't, I can't deviate from that path. That's the part of who I am. And she says it in a strange way, but at the heart of it, what she's saying is very, very true. She's basically expressing who she is. But I went to Gujarat. I was very impressed by what Modi has accomplished. Mamata Banerjee is terrible. I have nothing for her. Modi has accomplished a lot, and I tell everybody to vote for Modi because he's really done a lot. But I can never vote for him, unfortunately, because my heart belongs to the CPM forever, and I will not deviate from that path. That's kind of my article of faith. But I totally support him and I endorse him. It's really funny, not the least because of her Hindi. And also because the interviewer is like absolutely confused as to what she's trying to say, not just because of the Hindi, but the political point that she's trying to make. It just doesn't make any sense. But as a Bengali, it makes perfect sense what she's saying. She's saying what she's used to, what she believes is right, conflicts with what she sees is right. And again, both of these are emotional connections. I don't know what she went to Gujarat, what she saw, whether, she says, Gujarat Shorgo hai. Again, I doubt Gujarat Shorgo hai. But the fact is she feels so. And this is really the way elections work in Bengal. And Prasant Kishore, for all his hundreds of crores, will never understand that. Will never understand that where Mamata Banerjee lost the plot, partially it was because of the optics, but partially because she lost he lost that idealism. The idealism, I mean, much of it might have just been a projection. True, maybe she was always like this, but the way she was perceived, this extremely clean person who might not be as intellectual as a Jyoti Babu, but unlike Jyoti Babu, who kind of comes across as this arrogant, superior guy, she's a person of the people. She truly feels empathy. She is a nice person. She's an honest person. She's a person of unquestionable personal probity. When she decided to allow her nephew to be hyphenated with her, she effectively took she's taken the fallout for him. And that is where I believe Narendra Modi has drawn level with Mamata Banerjee in the Bengali psyche. This is where it lies. And this is what I had expected, even if they were discussing off the cuff, that PK would make this point. Again, the thing that I would like to conclude with is one of the things about Bengal elections which make it so endearing and funny and is the involvement of intellectuals. So a lot of people, intellectuals are essentially influencers, Bengali influencers from the pre-Instagram era. Like Kim Kardashian, nobody knows why they're famous, except they're famous for being famous. So many of these, the Bengali intellectuals, the ones, some of them are like vote BJP candidates, some of them are Trinamool candidates, but the ones who want to show that they're above all of it, they still came out with this video where they sang a song about fighting fascism, which is basically BJP. And they said, no matter who you vote for, never vote for the BJP. So they were a little embarrassed to throw in their lot with Mamata Banerjee because of Abhishek. And they really would love to support the CPM, but supporting CPM is like choosing Rinku Singh in your fantasy league and making him your captain and asking for double points. So they just really can't show their true colors. So they have to make these ambivalent fight against fascism, say no to BJP. So they came up with this video. Now, again, this video was done by Anupam Roy, who's like the biggest music director in Bengal. He's also a junior of mine from Jadavpur University, I think computer science or electronics. And then, of course, because in Bengal, any effort by one group of intellectuals shall be met by another effort by another group of intellectuals. The BJP intellectuals came up with their own song, which is pure cringe. It is cringe. It's helmed by Babul Supriyo, which in itself is, that's where it goes wrong, so there, Babul Supriyo, when he's the marquee intellectual, that's it. Half of the game is over right there. And then the song, it's so hilarious. They use the word Ina Mina Dika at one point of time just to rhyme because they couldn't find what to rhyme with. And they have this last line, which it just blew my mind. It says that, it's an election issue. Remember, these are election songs. Is that these people, by this means, whoever it is, they would rather talk about Ramila Thapar than Jadunath Sarkar. What? You got me there, man. Who will even understand what you're trying to say at this point of time? Like Ramila Thapar history, Jadunath Sarkar, Indian national history. Who exactly is this targeted to again? It was hilarious. It just goes to show this bubble that Bengali intellectuals live in. And plus, this was not just, it was like bad intellectualism, just terrible, terrible bad. So if there's anybody who's associated with that ever listening to this by any chance of fate, here's my thing. Don't, please don't. And one thing is that this is perhaps a call back to the days when BJP was not a force in Bengal. This is the kind of stuff they used to come out with Bapi Lahiri as their lead candidate, Bapi Lahiri and magician PC Sarkar. And this was exactly why nobody treated them seriously. Despite the conditions for Hindutva and everything existing there, that's why nobody took these guys seriously at all. And the BJP should at least be glad that they have more pragmatic, non-intellectuals running the show, because these guys are really that party's worst enemy, because they basically infantilize the entire party by putting out something like this. So again, don't. For your own good, just don't. At least the one that the anti-fascists came out with was a better song. It was more professionally put together. Again, I felt it was cringy in its way too, because it was just too overt. But then I apologize if I said anything negative about it, because then I saw the BJP one, and then I realized what a masterpiece I had just seen before. So again, it's hilarious that I think it's in no other state are like anybody considers the intellectual class. And these intellectual class, by the way, are people who act in theater. It's not that any of them are like Rabindranath Tagore or Satyajit Ray or anything. So it's just the word intellectual is being used not in when I think Bengal intellectual, I think Rabindranath Thakur, I think Bankim Chandra, I think Sharat Chandra. I think, I mean, that's the level we're talking about. We're not talking about at that level. I mean, that just doesn't exist in Bengal anymore, unfortunately. And even the smart people who are there, they're too scared to say anything, because they're honest and they're smart and they can't say anything, or they've left the state. So whoever left, again, the BJP don't do these things, because you end up, looking non-professional when you come out with a music video in which you have Ina Mina Dika and Jadunath Sarkar and Ramila Thapar together. What a great quiz question it will be. Connect Ina Mina Dika with Jadunath Sarkar and Ramila Thapar moving forward. Again, so this concludes the podcast for today. Once again, if you like this podcast, consider being a monthly supporter on our Patreon page. Till next time, stay safe. Bye-bye.